Three of the economists we'd lined up to discuss what's happening. We'll stay with the story. We'll get you all the developments that are happening in Mumbai. We'll also try and make sense of what's the way out. Because remember, at this moment, you have a crisis with migrants beginning to feel restless, and that frustration is beginning to show in some pockets. What's the solution? What's the way out? How do you ventilate the economy? Dr. Samiran Chakraborty joins us. He's Managing Director for Citibank. We've got Naina Kidwai with us, former country head of HSBC. Neelkanth Mishra is the Managing Director at Credit Suisse. I want to go across to Neelkanth Mishra first. We're seeing in Mumbai, as we saw in Delhi, some concern amongst migrants. This is a problem that's building. You've heard that the lockdown's been extended till the 3rd of May. What do you believe the government needs to do now to ensure what's happening in Mumbai can be contained very quickly, Mr. Mishra?
Yes, so I think the problem is clearly that if you have people who have no savings, who have no social support, a lot of our PDS is also very state specific. So many of the migrant workers in the cities they work in do not have ration cards where they draw on the support access.
Naina Kidwai, what do you believe should be the economic roadmap of the government to try and ensure that lockdown 2.0 is as minimally economically disruptive, or you can try and mitigate the pain to the extent possible? What should be done, ma'am?
Well, there has to be a gradual opening up of the economy, and I would certainly look at, say, construction sector. There are many companies, some real estate companies that actually have labor that they have kept on the construction site, feeding them, looking after them, but they're not going to be able to do that forever. And we'll get the next rush of migrant labor rushing out, as in the pictures you're seeing right now, if we aren't able to deploy them and keep them engaged. So I would say that a selective opening up in the so-called green areas where companies see fit, because obviously if there's activity happening, they need supplies to come in, they need people to be looked after, and enable some of the opening up to happen in a realistic way. Let these decisions be made not centrally, but as a distributed leadership through states, through the district collectors and DMs, so that we have this limping back of the economy at the earliest. I think what has shaken everyone is the fact that we still don't know what a selective opening up looks like between now and May 4th. So let's hope that essential supplies includes a vast swath of industry, and some of these sectors that deploy large numbers of people are enabled to come in.
But we just heard Samiran Chakraborty from Amitabh Kant at the Niti Aayog that the priority is to contain the disease first. That yes, livelihoods is important, but we need to ensure that we can save lives, because if these migrants take the problem back into rural India, then we have no escape. We simply don't have the health infrastructure. How do you think the government should be balancing this dilemma between lives and livelihood?
It's definitely not easy. So one of the suggestions that we have is to get these so-called green zones, the local economy started there. We quite understand that you can't even start a factory in a green zone, because that factory is going to have a long supply and distribution chain required, which is going to be tough to open up. But you can easily open up the local services, the smaller shops, the smaller restaurants, even smaller transport operators within that green zone, to make at least livelihood possible for at least parts of India, which would alleviate the stress to some extent. And then once that part of the economy starts working, when the lockdown is over in other parts of the country, we are not starting from zero. We are starting with one step already in the process. And that, I think, will take us in a position where the pickup when the lockdown is over will be faster. Otherwise, if the engine is completely shut, then to restart it by just a flip of a switch is not going to be easy.
Neelkanth Mishra, you've been spending a lot of time thinking about what's the best way out of the current situation. It's a traumatic situation for a lot of people who have no livelihood now. For about 21 days, they haven't been paid. If you were advising the government, what would you tell them on what they should be doing at this moment?
I think the solution has to be an aggressive increase in testing. So we really need to know very early how deep the problem is. We also need to widen the base. I mean, look at how the data has shaped up. Till 6th of April, we had 284 districts affected. On 12th of April, we had 354 districts affected. Now that if people are not really moving around, how did 14 days into the lockdown, how did 70 additional districts get infected? And if you only caught them after 15 days, the people you caught had already been infected for quite a while, and therefore have already infected a lot of people. So this is a discomfort that anyone sitting in Delhi or at the central level will have, as to not being able to understand how widely the disease has spread. And I think the first step has to be aggressive testing, a sharp expansion in testing. Something that I believe was hitting the headlines is perhaps being planned, which is you do antibody testing of masses, get a good sense of how widely this has spread, and then start opening up the districts. Because at this stage, even with 350 districts, it's like half the districts of India. I mean, why are we locking down the whole country? The reason is that the data from the other districts is not trustworthy. So that has to be the first step. I think
but there are really serious constraints even to that, Neelkanth. The fact is that a lot of the testing kits that we thought we'd procured from China haven't come in because the United States outbid us and they've gone to the US instead. And when it comes to dollar bidding, we can't hope to compete. So how do you ramp up testing in such short time when the whole world is trying to get its hands on the same kits?
Yeah, so there are the PCR kits which are the antigen kits. You can do antibody testing at a massive scale. You can do pool testing of antibodies. Basically, you take blood serum randomly, and these are statistically well-proven techniques. 300 to 400 samples a district will suffice you to give some confidence that this district can be opened up. Even if there are 10 cases in a district, it should, once you've done enough testing to convince yourself that there are only 10 cases in a district, you can open it up. Indian districts have 10 lakh people. 5 districts add up to Singapore. The point is, once you know who is infected, then the rest can go about their own work. And I think that will also allow the basic things to start working. See, in a poor country like India, everything is essential. We are very soon going to have problems where if only 25% of flour mills are working, what are you going to do with the wheat? You need atta. And what happens to packaged food? It's already starting to run out because the inventories are not being replenished. Because, if you're selling milk, you can't sell milk without plastic packaging. You can't make plastic packaging without making granules. You cannot have trucks not moving around. If you don't have dhabas running, how will national trucks move around? So in a country with a $2,000 per capita GDP, you are talking about almost everything being essential in one form or the other. And therefore, it is very important that we test aggressively, use whatever tools are available. I think getting 300, 400,000 kits, even if for antibodies, should be the highest priority, and then commission these tests and go on.
Samiran, Chakraborty, what's the best way to try and save jobs? Now, the government has said, don't fire people. They're asking corporates to be compassionate. Many companies are listening, some are not. And there are dozens of stories about job losses across sectors. What can be done at this time? Can anything at all be done to prevent a bloodbath in the job market?
I think two quick points there. One is that I think we have to have the first tranche of the economic stimulus ready and announced, which will give the companies some confidence that it's not all gloom and doom out there and there is a glimmer of hope. And the second thing is that different countries are trying with the model of trying to see whether part of the wages could be provided by the government in the interim period during the crisis. I think now we have enough data with us about at least the somewhat larger companies who pay GST and all to figure out that what is their working capital requirement and what kind of wages they pay. So based on that, you could have almost an automatic mechanism of part of the wage funding at least coming from the government, which could reduce the possibility of job losses even in the current environment, because otherwise things could be on a spiral very soon.
Ms. Kidwai, from a financial perspective, virtually every sector that we've been speaking to wants some kind of a bailout. At the very least, they want an interest moratorium. They're also seeking financial stimulus from the government. How should the government be prioritizing? Is it possible that for about 3 months, 6 months or a year, there is a moratorium on interest payments and the government resources are limited? Where do they spend them? Do they pick particular sectors, or do they pick the poorest of the poor who actually need that financial help the most?
Well, of course, it's all interconnected, and prioritizing is key. At this stage, we don't even know the scale of this relief package. Forget stimulus, but relief package that the government has in mind. At FICCI, we have suggested 4.5% of GDP is what is required. But to answer it's to how we might actually look at this going forward, I think the first instance on workers and paying workers, we've seen larger companies all stepping up to the plate, but the issue is that the labor-intensive sectors tend to be MSMEs, and many of them have not even opened. So are they in a position to pay their workers up to the 14th of April, let alone thereafter? And the answer is no. So we are going to have a situation where workers are laid off if these companies do not see a future for themselves. The second is finance. I mean, they are out of money. Cash flow is key. Cash flow to pay workers aside, cash flow to run your business. So the way we need to, I think, look at this is as a banking sector, why not reconsider the way NPAs are considered at 90 days, extend that to 180 days or maybe even a year, so that we have companies getting reprieve from the banks, and the banks are not as hesitant as they are to lend to the very companies that need the money, which is those that are on the brink of becoming NPAs. And I would just say that there's an interesting piece, in fact, the study out by the World Bank for South Asia, just out over the last couple of days. And they're really saying, hey, whereas public sector banks were seen as the curse, they're now a blessed curse for countries like ours, and let them step up, let government through them step up to provide the support that is required to companies at this point. So it's well beyond moratoriums. It is support for a period where interest subvention also happens.
But Neelkanth Mishra, there is stress on all counts. There is stress in boardrooms on account of the fact that revenues are down, business plans have gone for a toss. People who are watching you, if they're employees in companies, they're worried about jobs. And I'm also most concerned about the urban disorganized sector, the unorganized sector, where people have zero safety nets, very little savings. What are the concrete solutions or suggestions you have to try and mitigate the situation?
So it has to be at least in two parts. The first part has to be during the period of the lockdown. So there is this clamor for economic stimulus, but when the whole objective of the government is to slow the economy down, because it's like a patient is infected and the doctor says you take rest and take care of your illness, and then you can start running again. So during the lockdown, the government's objective is to slow the economy down. So there is less of social mingling, is more of social distancing, and then the virus can be taken care of better. So during this period, all that needs to be done, and both Samiran and Ms. Kidwai did mention this, that you need to take care of people who have no savings. So you make more Jan Dhan transfers, you front load Narega payments, you try to make sure that food camps are running, work with NGOs, make sure that people are fed, and social unrest is minimized. Secondly, you need to take care of smaller enterprises, not just, I think just delaying of interest payments may not suffice if it is for this long. You may have to step in and even take care of their interest to the extent that you can. The provision of cash flows, because as you know, enterprises don't die because of insolvency, they always die of a lack of liquidity. You can keep surviving because entrepreneurs are generally hopeful people. if you get a good cash flow going, and then you can deal with the NPAs that emerge later. But I think it's very important to get credit flowing. It's very important that we do not cause damage during this period of lockdown, which prevents us from starting off after the lockdown. Basically, there are businesses which are now literally eating into their working capital. So there are transporters who may have had 10 lakh rupees of working capital. Because of just surviving through this downturn, they may end the lockdown at 7 lakhs or 6 lakhs of working capital. So they will be stunted enterprises. You could see enterprises shutting down. And I think, so during the lockdown, that absolutely has to be the objective, and using credit guarantee funds. There are known GST accounts, etc. It is possible to do that. Post the lockdown lifting, I think there needs to be a stimulus, because it will be an economy which will be bruised with low sentiments, weak sentiments, consumers who are likely to conserve more because of what they've just gone through. And therefore, the government needs to then stimulate. But that phase could be several months away. During this time, I think the government attention has to be to minimize the damage. So as you sedated the body, make sure that none of the organs is getting weaker.
Okay, but the fact is the body still is in ICU, and that is the real problem. Now there are competing demands coming in conclusion, Samiran Chakraborty, from different industries, each one seeking help. Companies are asking for GST to be reduced. If you reduce GST, it takes a hit on government finances. Poverty economists have come out and said, increase the wealth tax, charge companies more, the rich more. People are saying we're already paying 42%, 39%. How is this even fair? So each solution or each policy alternative has pain points. Which are the pain points you push ahead with, and which pain points could cause greater trouble than they do good?
So there are three ways you can provide an economic stimulus. One is through specific grants to industries. The second is through cheaper credit, which probably Neelkanth was referring to. And the third is tax cuts. I think in the current juncture, the easier solution is to provide a cheaper credit, which for all practical purposes, you can keep somewhat off balance sheet for the government, which will not show up in your fiscal deficit numbers so much. The other two options will show up in the fiscal deficit, but our suggestion is to have a separate COVID budget. The advantage of having a COVID budget is that it will become transparent how much we are spending on that, and we could have a
How do you fund the COVID budget, Samiran?
So there are three ways of funding the COVID budget. One is you can have a tax-free bond. In the current environment, if you provide the retail guys with 5-6% of tax-free interest, tax-free bond, that will be lapped up, our senses. The second option is you can reprioritize some of the expenditure which is not important right now and put it under the COVID budget. The third is that even after all this, there will be a requirement for the RBI to chip in. Our sense is that RBI has the right to directly provide finance to the government in times of national calamity. That clause from the FRBM Act needs to be invoked, and through that channel, RBI will be separately funding the COVID budget. And over a 2-3 year period, once the budget will be wound up, automatically that part of the RBI funding will go out of the system, and it will not be repeated ad infinitum. I think that's the way to go forward, because otherwise the scale of the problem is so large that we cannot have it in our core budget. The numbers will become really, really ugly if we start putting everything together and make money fungible.
So over the past 20 minutes, you've had an opportunity to lay out your big picture economic prescriptions for what should be done to ventilate the economy. Once you're back in a normal room, more treatment is still required, but we've got some very sharp insights from Naina, Kidwai, Neelkanth Mishra and Samiran Chakraborty. I would have loved to press ahead with this conversation and draw on their expertise further, but I want to move ahead because in about 10 minutes from now, Uddhav Thackeray, the Chief Minister of Maharashtra, will be doing this big press conference. For the time being, Neelkanth Mishra from Credit Suisse, Samiran Chakraborty from Citibank and Naina Kidwai for joining us with your insights. Thank you. I do hope to invite you back to our network for more insights. Hello everyone, this is Rahul Kanwal here. Hope you enjoyed this video. For the latest news and analysis, like and subscribe the India Today YouTube channel, and don't forget to press the bell icon to stay updated.